Right, let's make a start. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining. If you're here to talk about and to hear about planning for inclusive growth in a chaotic environment, you're in the right place. If you've accidentally arrived here, then you're in for a real treat, because this is going to be a fantastic discussion, and I would suggest that you hang around and listen anyway. My name's Andrew Laird. I'm the Chief Executive of Mutual Ventures, and we're hosting this webinar today alongside our colleagues from Project Centre. We're a consultancy that specialises in supporting public services, and with levelling up in mind, we've done a lot of work with councils to help them get levelling up funding, and are now working with them to help them implement projects. So we will talk a little bit about that as we go. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by three fantastic guests. I've got Katie Kelly, who is the Deputy Chief Executive from East Ayrshire Council. Katie, do you want to just say a quick hello there?
Good morning, everyone. Great to see you.
Thanks, Katie. I've got Bharati Godke, who is the Technical Director from Project Centre. Bharati, do you want to say hello? Bharati was on mute there, but yeah, she was saying hello. That's fine, that's fine. And finally, Mark Bandali, who's a Managing Consultant from my team at Mutual Ventures.
Good morning, Andrew. Hello, everyone.
Great stuff. So a little bit of housekeeping. We're recording this, so there is no need to frantically take notes or anything, and we'll send out the recording afterwards, and you can share that with colleagues if you'd like to. If you've got any questions that you want to put to the panel, because there are a lot of people here, we don't have the visual and audio enabled, so you'll have to put your question in the Q&A function, which is down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will do our best to get to as many of those as we can. So, planning for inclusive growth in a chaotic environment, what do we mean by that? So, as you will know, many of you on this on this webinar will know, councils exist in a complex and often a very chaotic environment. There's continuous structural changes. The most recent one I can think of is the plan to abolish LEPs, the proposal for new enterprise zones. This type of thing is constantly happening, and councils have to react. And also, you're having to pretty consistently bid for funding, the most recent examples being levelling up funding and obviously preparing investment plans for the Shared Prosperity Fund. All this is going on, and at the same time, you have to react to these at the same time as supporting local populations with the cost of living crisis and ensuring post-pandemic recovery. So it means that you have to operate in a pretty consistent state of planning, which is not an easy thing to do. So against this challenging backdrop, local leaders like yourselves are asking, how do we create the conditions for inclusive growth? Inclusive growth is a really important subject matter right now. It's not just about growth for growth's sake, it's about everybody benefiting from it. They're also asking, how do we support and engage local businesses and communities as a part of that? How do we make sure as public servants that we're supporting them to thrive? And then also, how do we design the public realm to improve health and well-being for local populations? So those are some of the key questions that we're going to be talking about today. And I'm going to invite Katie, Bharati and Mark to give some opening comments on that. And I'll come to Katie first. East Ayrshire is a real exemplar in terms of community engagement, community empowerment and inclusive growth. So Katie, if I could come to you first, just for some of your opening thoughts.
Thanks very much, Andrew, and welcome everyone. It's really good to be part of this today. You know, I've been given a lot of reflection on the kind of relationship between serving communities and local businesses, and I suppose the story, the involvement, I've been involved now over 30 years in public service, and as Andrew said, it can be a kind of chaotic and cluttered environment. And I think for me, the understanding of the people you serve, the natural communities that they live in, and the business community that you serve. So the first thing about really good planning is about the understanding and really knowing the landscape and getting to know the people that are part of that. And in East Ayrshire, we've taken a lot of time over the last 10 years to really get to know and understand our communities. and to understand that people don't live in the constructs of public service with, you know, kind of boundaries of local government where we set things up to administrate. People live in natural communities, and in my kind of area and in a lot of areas that are not in cities, people tend to work and live locally as well. So in my organisation, for example, East Ayrshire Council, there's over 6,000 employees and about 75% of them live locally. So there's something about getting to understand the landscape and then not looking to see what people you think that they need, and also getting kind of distracted by a big funding application opportunity comes in and you kind of think, oh, we need to get some of that money. I think it's really important to actually, first of all, lay the grounds to say, what is our community like? What is the profile of it? What are the people's hopes and dreams? And then how does that tie in with the intelligence that we have around that area? So in East Ayrshire, we've done a lot of work engaging with communities over the last 10 years, really starting to understand and have deep listening with them to understand what their hopes and dreams are for the place that they live. And our roles change from one to be a fixer and to always providing services and almost sometimes feeding a dependency culture, but much more about enabling and getting alongside the people we serve. And that work's really paid dividends, but it does take a long time, and it's about trust. And that waxes and wanes depending on what's happening in the environment round about. But what I would say is that understanding our communities better has resulted in the council and other public services having a closer and deeper relationship and understanding when opportunities do arise, or when pandemics or other things come in, that you can quickly move to action when you've got that. So for me, my point of view in East Ayrshire is, a lot of our communities are now developing their own action plans. And those are plans that are for them, not for us. The council and their partners would be in the audience at the launch of that. So over 25 of our communities have got their own action plans and for their own natural community. And they touch on a whole range of things that you would expect about how a place looks, about public realm, village and town centres, as Andrew's talked on, but also about how they engage with local businesses. And often when this process has been undergone, local businesses have got deeply engaged in local action planning, and we can start to see the interface between community-led regeneration and that traditional economic growth and regeneration. There's a lovely sweet spot in the middle there, because people that serve communities don't go home, they're not anything different. When they go home at night, they're part of the community, and people that work in communities aren't just business people. When they go home at night and shut the door, they're part of that community as well. So it's understanding that bigger picture. So for me, really looking and understanding the area, working alongside communities, understanding their hopes and dreams, and looking to see what we can do as an organisation to help that, to enable that, where we need to get out of the way and let communities and businesses do things for themselves, but also where we should be doing things. So actually understanding what the priorities are. And that is a very place-based approach, and it does feel messy to some. It's not nice and uniform, and but actually it pays dividends if you understand the nature of a community and the nature of a business community. And just before I kind of pass on, because I think we'll have lots of time to discuss this. In East Ayrshire, where I serve, one part of the area used to be lace making along a valley, and that was what people did in that area. Another big part of our area was coal mining, and that's what brought communities together, and that's what really expanded communities for a while, and some of those have now contracted. And in other areas it was engineering. And the nature of those communities and the way they're built up and whether they're urban or rural differs from place to place, and we need to be able to diversify as organisations to be able to serve that need and to help people to grow again in that setup. And we will talk about this more today, but I'm very interested in fact that we've managed to do a lot of really deep engagement. Communities are now running over 60 assets, as many of you are aware, in our communities, from golf courses to community centres. But also what we're seeing is a real rise of community wealth building, where we're working closely with local businesses to grow and diversify and provide people with really good work. And good, fair work is going to help us around that whole level that Andrew was talking about poverty, cost of living, and also when the chips are down, if people have got good work, they can pull together and be resilient. So it's a kind of circle, and I think today we'll talk about how those two things meet together. Thanks, Andrew.
We certainly will, Katie. I've just got a few quick questions for you, actually, just immediately to follow up on that. You made a good point at the start about how it's quite easy for councils to get distracted by opportunities to bid for funding. And there's this pot of funding. We have to bid for that. We have to get some of it, and we'll kind of find a way to reverse engineer it into our plans. And how do you keep focused on what you're trying to achieve for your area and not get distracted by what the latest shiny fund to bid for is?
It's about the tail wagging the dog. I think if we understand, if we've got a really good understanding of the people we serve, the business community, and a whole lot of good intelligence, that helps us have key priorities that we want to plan for. And then I've got to tell you this, and maybe I'll get booze back, but there's times when you shouldn't apply for the funding that's there. Some, particularly around inequalities, and my experience over the years is a lot of money was made available for, in brackets, poorer communities to help to reverse inequalities, major fast investments, and then they were withdrawn. And what we found, and there's research now absolutely backing this up, that actually deep investment that involves employing people and then withdrawing it after 3 years exacerbates inequalities. So actually big funding can do damage if it's not invested in the right place. So my litmus test of investment would be now, does it add value to what we'd already had in terms of our hopes and dreams and what the intelligence told us? And is it sustainable? Because actually investing in things that are non-sustainable or where we don't have the revenue stream to continue to support that actually creates more depression in a local economy. So for me, councils can borrow, and we have done in East Ayrshire. We've got a £500 million capital programme, and many more have got the same. But the revenue implications must be carefully thought of, because revenue is thinning the ground and becoming thinner. And so any investment must pay dividends. So I would say sometimes the answer is don't rush in. We didn't rush to level, with levelling up. The first round came round and people were all grappling about. And we took a really hard decision to say, let's just gather our thoughts here. Where would our best investment be if we were going for that? And we went to round 2. Now, that was risky, but it was better to invest in something that we could support on a long-term basis and contributed to a bigger regeneration picture. So I think that's the answer.
I think that's a really good point. And one of the problems I think councils have is that they are often forced, because of how funding works, to think in very short-term windows. What you've described there requires an ability to have the confidence to think over a 5 to 10 year period. And that's often quite difficult, isn't it? Because, councils, budgets that they get from central government often do only last a year, and you're thinking about just getting through that year rather than what the long-term impact is.
Absolutely, and if I can just come back on that, I spent some time last week with a number of brilliant colleagues from Scottish Government, some ministers and others, and we were talking about, in COSLA, that relationship between local and national government and what that looks and feels like in terms of the personal nature of the relationship, in terms of trust, but also what it looks and feels like from a fiscal point of view. How can local government be empowered to think long-term and invest long-term? And we are in the process of trying to reimagine that relationship and look at better planning, longer-term budgeting. Now, it seems like the holy grail, but actually we kind of do it, but in a more of a stuttered way. And for me, community planning is a big thing. That's been 10-year plans that we've set. So you might not have all the funding in place. Sometimes people get really caught up in, if we don't have the funding, we can't do it. I think you have to have vision. You have to horizon scan and say, this is where we would like to be in 10 years. These are the steps that we would get to do it. And if we start to set that out, it's like the field of dreams, people will come. It might not be that you have that part of the investment in place yet, but if your plan's there, when the opportunity comes, it slots in.
Fantastic. Mark, I'll let you come in here. I think you've got a point.
Yeah, no, really interesting from what Katie's just said, and my reflection on the previous Levelling Up Fund rounds. So I've been involved in 7 or 8 bids, and thinking through where there were successes. Generally speaking, the councils that secured the funding had a long-term strategy, had a long-term vision, and essentially made the Levelling Up Fund work for them rather than them working for the fund. They were able to identify projects or specific investments which fitted with the criteria that would already been conceptually developed and aligned to strategy, and the bid very much demonstrated how what they're proposing fits with this wider network and wider portfolio of plans and aspirations for communities and businesses. So it very much was part of the jigsaw rather than reverse engineering something to fit the Levelling Up Fund. So I think that sort of understanding of communities, of businesses, and understanding the landscape more generally and developing plans and visions based on that, it's a constant challenge, as Katie said. But actually, if the fund comes along at the right time, you have a really compelling strategic narrative there about how this project that you're bidding for fits in with the wider perspective, I think. So that's a really interesting point from Kelly.
Very much so. Thanks, Mark. And then Katie, just one more question from me, and we'll then move on to Bharati. I think you also talked a little bit about how the role of communities. Now, we will talk about this later on, but just very briefly on the fact that you can't expect community capacity to just be there overnight if you need it. Like, for instance, in a pandemic, it requires tending to and building up over a period of time. You can't just expect communities to pop up and organise overnight because the council needs help. You've got to have a history of trusting and supporting them.
Yeah, I think for me, the starting point is, you always say this kind of shoulder to shoulder. You know, it's like, you know, for me, it was always the council needs help in the past and the community would be there, or the council has a problem about resources and budgeting and the community would object to it. My proposal and what we've seen happen over the years is actually we're both part of the same solution. Because if I said to you that, you know, 75% of the people are interchangeable as community anyway, then actually, you know, you can't just split yourself in two and become a public servant one day and a community person at night. So I think that power ratio is very interesting to me, you know, because usually with people that hold power and hold administration, hold budgets, they are more powerful, and that relationship then would be, okay, we need help at this time and it's on their terms. What I'm saying is the power is actually equal, and that this takes trust to build that up, and also it takes proof that you've really changed your ways. And in East Ayrshire, we kind of had to do it because we had loads of resource savings to make, but it felt like the right thing to do because some of the issues in our communities were just, you know, life expectancy and a whole range of different things. They just weren't changing, and no matter what we invested or what we thought people needed. And actually we kind of give things labels, and then, you know, it's like you call something community resilience, and we'll have a community resilience plan, and then we'll take it to the community and see what they think. No, these need to be developed with and for. And actually, the plan A and the plan B I might have, the community have a plan C, and I am there to serve them. It's not my money. It's not the things. I am there, you know, I'm the guardian of that on their behalf. They've employed me. So I think the changing of the power balance is the first thing, and building trust and moving at the speed of trust. And that very much comes from the Cormac Russell asset base. But the other thing I love about this, and people don't talk about it, is the best way that communities can develop together is horizontal connections. Sometimes we need to get out of the way. And, you know, some of our communities are really advanced in this work in terms of running their own facilities and doing things, regardless of whether people would regard them as being well off or not. But other communities are less advanced. And rather than them me saying, how do I help the less advanced, I say, why don't you go and see what's happening at Nether Third? They're doing brilliant things. Talk to them. They overcame the problems. Horizontal connections and us making the connections and stepping back is very powerful.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Katie. Just before I come to Bharati, I've noticed that some of our listeners are trying to raise their hands to make a point, but if I could just ask you to pop your question into the Q&A rather than, because we're not going to be inviting people to ask their questions live. So please put your questions into the Q&A. So another really key element of inclusive growth is obviously public health. Very important element and something that councils can impact in a very big way, particularly around the built environment. So Bharati's going to talk to us a little bit about the public realm and how that impacts public health, which in turn leads to inclusive growth. So Bharati, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. I have a little presentation here that I'll share, but just before I start off, just picking up on that point of community involvement and how can we make these spaces work? I think it's taking the community along from the very beginning. First of all, understanding what they want, and then taking them along through the whole process and understanding once they've identified what they want improved, understanding how they want that improved and ensuring that that comes through. And I think it's important for not just the communities that live in your neighborhoods, but also the business communities, which may then take up ownership of these and help in the long-term maintenance and running of these spaces. And yeah, so I'm just going to share this presentation. Hopefully it works. Right. So
Yep.
I'm going to talk a bit about how designing that public realm in a inclusive and easy way can actually help with public health. Looking at town centers, I mean, going back to the pandemic days, when we were all cooped up in our homes and were allowed that 1 hour or so to go out and get a bit of physical exercise, that 1 hour became so important for us because we got that chance not just to go and walk about a bit in the parks, but also to look at other people and this connection with other people, whether we were able to even speak to them or, despite the distance we had to keep from them, really helped, I think, all of us to get through that difficult period. But what has happened is, I mean, many of our parks obviously are not as frequented nowadays, particularly during the working days, for instance. And you have your community members, particularly elderly people or whatever, that may not feel comfortable enough now to go into a park for a walkabout or to meet others because they feel lonely, they feel afraid that there may be antisocial behavior going on, or it's just a feeling of that there's not enough safety for them, or just that loneliness just continues on, perhaps because there are not that many people around. So really our town centers, our high streets and our neighborhood streets, those are the areas that need to be looked at because they may be the places where there are more people around, and those are the places where people can feel comfortable and at ease, and those are those areas where there can be increased social interactions. So how can we make these more attractive for people to go to? I think it's really about making them accessible and increasing the amount of space that people have for these socializing activities. Can we look at how our town centers are currently? I mean, are they traffic dominated? Is there a need for vehicles to come into these streets? Can we turn them into pedestrian streets that's more for the people, and make them nice spaces that encourage people to visit and come together? Here you can see how just converting these perhaps these are some back streets that have been converted, and these have now created you have places where people are able to sit down and enjoy just the atmosphere, really, and the impact this must have on the mental well-being of the community that frequents this town center must be immense. Places where they can socialize, where families can come together, where friends can come together and just enjoy the sun, not just go shopping, but perhaps just have a place where they see other people. Here, this was an area where the local community and the council decided, that this space could be better used. There was the opportunity to shift that bus station outside of this space and better connect the building that you see at the far end, which is a library and a community center, to the rest of the town center. So the decision was taken really to move that out and to turn this into a public square. And the change this has brought about, it's completely turned this into a safe and accessible space. Before, the environment used to be, as you can see, polluted, full of vehicles, really difficult to cross. And now you have this amazing space that the business community around the space has really taken it upon themselves to maintain this area. And the increase in footfall obviously is so great for the businesses as well. Again, you don't have to obviously remove all the traffic. You can do, there are simple ways in which you can improve. Just bringing in seating to allow people to rest on their way on their shopping trips is also such a important aspect of improving these areas and helping communities to improve their health and well-being. Again, creating social spaces, can we look at how these spaces are designed to allow people to interact? Just bringing in color and nature and brightness into your spaces. Here's an example of where there was a level difference was treated with a parapet wall, and the shops along that side had the building had a big overhang. So that parapet was converted into a planting bed. The overhang was taken away, and now you have this really lovely, bright, and space which has elements of nature in it, and people just love to sit there and enjoy the sun, if not other things. You don't have to do many things, really expensive stuff to make a difference. There are quick wins and small interventions that can completely change the environment and make it better for the people to use. This is an inner city street, for instance, which was chock-a-block full of traffic all the time. And the decision was taken, I think the local businesses sort of got together along with the council to try and make a change here. And because there was that not sufficient budget, the parklets were introduced. I think these were perhaps the first parklets, earliest parklets that were introduced in London. And this has completely changed this area. And this has become now a much loved pedestrian route from the local neighborhood into the town center. And you have people that work in the area as well as others that sit here and enjoy a bit of nature outside. At the neighborhood level, it's so important really to, I'm sorry, I seem to be missing an image there, to change the environment. Here is a neighborhood street that was so busy with traffic because it was being used as a rat run by motorists that were trying to avoid a signalized junction further out. And this is a street with 3 schools on it, and was completely quite a difficult environment for school children going to school. For instance, you can see how narrow the footways were and how much traffic you had in there. The decision was taken to convert this into a livable street, and traffic interventions were brought in to change this into a one-way system, and a modal filter was introduced, and the landscape designers were brought in to change the public realm, and this was the outcome. And we now have kids cycling to school. You have a lot of people that sit out in the spaces that were created, and the whole community has come together to claim this street as their own. And that's I mean, finally a school street, you generally have the zigzags that that tell people you can't park here when school kids are being dropped off. Rather than doing that, just involving the school children, designing this area to be more attractive can make such an immense difference to how people walk to school rather than bring in their cars. And it's an absolute transformation. Right, that's what I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bharati. Some fantastic examples there of this really transformed public realm, and just reflecting, Mark, I'm sure you feel the same, some of the levelling up bids that we've helped with. That town centre regeneration element of it is so important, because there are so many places that still look like your before pictures there. So it's really brilliant to bring that to life. Katie, I just wanted to ask you really quickly, just your view on the use of public realm and public realm improvements to both drive the local economy, but also improve well-being for people.
I'm a great believer that if a place looks and feels nice, and the local people that live there have had a say in what it's like, it makes a massive difference to people's well-being. I mean, I know that from where I live as well. I do think, though, I was reflecting that, you know, some of the work we're doing just now is about undoing some of the things that were done in the past. You know,
Right.
a one-way system around Kilmarnock that really just chopped the town in two, if you like. With, you know, so there's and we've been looking at a whole range of things that, you know, almost like we're the custodians now of the future, and it's so important that, and I no offence to any planners online or in the room, but actually this isn't about just what will look good on a blueprint. This has to look and feel and last for the future. And I do think people also are longing for greener things, you know, right in the most urban areas. And some of our communities actually in the more rural areas have taken over woodland, and they're doing some amazing things around walking. And so I think there's a real appetite for land and assets to be acquired and for communities to be involved in that. And I'll give you one example. New Mills in East Ayrshire is one of the areas that used to be a Lace community. They've got their own regeneration group. It came out of a community-led action plan. They developed a brand called Love New Mills. It's in the shape of a heart, but it's in lace. And they bought all their own things for public realm, bright reds, not the colour of anything else in East Ayrshire, but and they've got the heart on it, and there's planters and seating, and there's lovely picnic benches. And my heart sings when I drive through New Mills, because the community designed it, raised the money and put it in. So I think it gives a community real personality if they're deeply involved in the design, and it links to their heritage. I do worry sometimes that we over-engineer town centres and village centres with uniform equipment that doesn't maybe last the time of years, or make major structural changes like one-way systems in the 70s that felt like a good thing, and now it's so hard to undo something like that once it's done.
Yeah, it is. No, that's really helpful. Thanks, Katie, for bringing that to life. So, Mark, the next question clearly is, you know, how do you turn, you know, Barati's, you know, before picture into the now picture? What's the kind of process? What's needed to happen? How do you go about even starting that journey?
Thanks, Andrew. I think I'll focus on the bit where you left off. Actually, how do you start that journey? How do you start that thinking? So ultimately, I think, you know, reflecting on where Katie and Barati have come from, this is very much a message about blending the people and the place agendas, and not simply sort of a focus on purely regeneration for the sake of it, but actually asking the so what question from the perspective of communities, from individual residents, businesses, and so on. So this blended approach to identifying the problem and seeking solutions. I think the theory of change exercise and process is a really helpful way of looking at things. So ultimately, you would start off, and very much based on what Katie said, an identification of the problems we're trying to solve, and that not being led per se by the council. Now, of course, you would involve the council, but various elements of it, for example, regeneration, transport, and planning, the sort of place-based side of things, but also thinking about the people's side. So children's social care, adult social care, public health, leisure, skills and education. So you've got this real blend and mix of the sort of place and the people-based. But importantly, when we're trying to identify the problems we're trying to solve for an area or a place, the views of residents and communities is incredibly important. Third sector organisations and community groups, local businesses, and public service partners such as health, the LEP, police, and so on. So to start a theory of change process, to think about the problems we're trying to solve collectively across both the council and community partners. So based on consultation, based on engagement, feedback, and workshops, this broad audience to come together to identify the problems we're trying to solve. That would be sort of point one, I think. Point two is asking ourselves the question, okay, these are the problems. but what are the systemic challenges, the market failures that are actually leading us to a point where there is, for example, inequality, or there is reduced, suppressed growth, and so on. So identifying the market failures and the challenges that are contributing to the problem. So doing that as a collective, this broad church of across the audience, to get this sort of holistic understanding of what the problem is and what's causing it, I think is a really important process. Then asking the so what question, which is sort of the third stage. So you've identified the problem, you've identified the market failures, but then you're asking, on what impact is this having, and seeing that through different lenses, residents, communities, the third sector, local businesses, and those public service partners. Looking at the impact of those failures from various different perspectives, I think is incredibly important. That's that bit around, as Katie said, understanding the landscape and understanding where people are coming from. But then the other bit about hopes and dreams, which Katie also mentioned, turning the problem on its head and asking the question, what does good look like from the perspectives of the stakeholders we've mentioned? So what are the desired outcomes for each of these, addressing these market failures? What would be the desired outcomes? And very much basing that on the problem we're trying to solve. So reducing deprivation, increasing growth, inclusive growth, and so on. Thinking about net zero considerations, given that every council's made majority of councils have made a commitment around being net zero by a particular point in time. So identifying the problem and then identifying what good looks like from various perspectives. So you've got the sort of two bookends of the theory of change then. And the important bit in the middle is, okay, we understand the problem and where we want to be. How do we get there? And this middle bit is about appraising ideas, or councils may have a pipeline of capital projects that have been developed but not implemented, and really using the theory of change as a logic model to test and ask how well would this project or would this program of projects address the market failures and result in one or more of the intended benefits in terms of what good looks like. So ultimately, this is a theory of change process which, if done properly, can actually help to inform investment decisions, but also help to develop and refresh strategies across the piece, really. So I think that's a really important stage to go through, and it certainly helped when we've done it with our clients. There's clarity, there's inclusive approach to defining the problem and identifying solutions. And back to Katie's point about this sort of inclusive approach and communities and businesses buying in, and the council not being seen as the sole driver here, but also it can be really an enabling experience and the start of the collaborative process there. So I would certainly recommend for places to think about things in the structure of a theory of change. And that really, I think, is an incredibly important place to start. Then there's obviously the business case process, which I know people are familiar with, so I won't go through in detail. But really, the theory of change exercise lays a very strong platform for the business case. So a lot of it is thinking about the strategic fit and the strategic case. So how does what's being proposed align with regional, local and national strategies, and really demonstrate how the council can progress with things in terms of growth and regeneration, addressing inequality, net zero commitments and so on. And then the economic case is very much about the benefits, which is what would good look like in terms of those measures and metrics. And importantly, back to one of Katie's earlier points, the financial case is incredibly important. You don't want to create a legacy that you can't pay for in the future, that creates these liabilities that either short-term gain for the long-term pain. So a critical question within the financial case would be, how do we afford this now in terms of the creation of this new intervention, but how will we sustain it financially in the future? Where's the revenue coming from? What are the costs? So these are all incredibly important questions. The business case comes, I think, after the theory of change. And if you can do a robust and collaborative theory of change, it's very much the best way to start this process off in terms of how do we implement.
Thanks, Mark. I think that theory of change process is really important because we've worked with a number of councils, both of us, where there's just a huge list of ideas, and we do initial workshops and that list grows even longer. And, you know, a lot of people even have their pet projects that they're determined to shoehorn in to whatever process has some funding behind it. And that theory of change process is a really what I'd call honest process that forces everybody to confront the challenges, where they're trying to get to, and actually what fits. And I think that's really good. Mark briefly touched on business cases there. If you are interested in more detail on that, on the Mutual Ventures website, I'll send the link as part of the follow-up. There's lots of information there on business cases and things like that. Just to get some questions going now. So we've had a few questions in. So Katie, if I could come to you first, and this is about the COVID-19 experience. Did that experience help enhance your collaborative approach? And did you develop new creative ways of working across the communities and the business sector as well?
Yeah, I mean, during COVID-19, it was one of the most terrible times for all of us in terms of the impact worldwide. But it was one of the times when I was proudest of being a leader and working with other leaders and serving incredible communities and businesses. And yes, there was some brilliant things happened. I think because we'd been working with communities in a different way since about 2013. Within 48 hours of the lockdown being announced, or was about to be announced, I did a call to action in council chambers. It was full, and I said to people, tell us what you need to serve, not the council people, the communities. What do you need to help each other? What is it you need? Is it a car? Is it an electric car? Do you need access to food? Our dinner ladies are going to keep cooking even though the schools are shut. We're going to take all the food orders we can get. And do you need grants? Do you need something to run up local resilience? Because East Ayrshire, as I said to you before, is made up of about 32 natural communities. And within 48 hours, we had over 100 community resilience groups have stepped up. We got them badges so they could move about their community, and the police would recognise that was okay. The food larder network, we did 4 food larders, and these are not food banks. These are things run for and by communities where you pay what you can afford. It's dignity, and anybody can go in there. You don't be checked out. So we now, during COVID, had a network of food larders. 16 of them are now still in place and are becoming almost like community shops. And communities just did the response. So we enabled that, and grants in people's accounts in 24 hours. And it was incredible. And all the way through, they stepped up and more people volunteered as people were furloughed. And we saw this incredible community response. Some councils across Britain set up humanitarian approaches, or the council led things. We didn't lead, we worked. They were our equal partner in terms of knowing what was needed in their community. And so that was a big part. We also, businesses really suffered, and we managed to get a lot of money for business grants, as you know, to keep things going. But that was really a brilliant time for saying, what does community wealth building look like? And our Community Wealth Building Commission was set up in 2020 Ayrshire-wide. And that started to say, okay, how can businesses diversify during this time? And so there was brilliant investment there for them to do things differently. We developed the East Ayrshire business card. It was the first in Scotland at that time, where it was loaded with money. We used it to help families that were struggling a wee bit, that they could buy local from anywhere, and we added all those businesses to that. But that local money stayed in the kind of the whole area. And we also got a lot of businesses online, Shop Happy. So as many businesses have wanted it, we said, right, we can get you online so people can still access you. So the relationship with the businesses around the business card, Shop Happy, but also helping businesses to diversify, restaurants to deliver foods, people to do something different in terms of what they'd done before to take themselves through that time. And I think that entrepreneurism and I can't say the word, and innovation, it really grew our relationship further, and the blurring between business and community, but we're all in the thing together. And I think community wealth building really started to blossom. Then we started to see what it felt like in action, because it's about, we didn't want businesses to go under, because if local businesses go under, local people aren't employed. If local people aren't employed, they don't have good money to spend and they move into poverty. So good work's important. So I think there was incredible leadership, incredible networks and relationships built up. And those are growing and evolving now as part of that community wealth building, a much more strategic approach.
Yeah, and how much of all that good stuff have you managed to maintain as we come out of the kind of sharp end of the pandemic? And did that require concerted effort to maintain some of the stuff?
Yeah, so we looked at our workforce, and a lot of the roles within a workforce in a council weren't needed the same way during COVID. So our employees were the first thing to say, okay, where do we need help? So our Vibrant Communities team changed completely from kind of growing and developing things to providing that support, helping people to shield, and also growing that support and enabling across the resilience piece. And the same for our business people, but also we had HR people that went and worked to help with social care because we struggled there. So our whole workforce, we did a questionnaire as well within, I think it was out within 48 hours to say, if we asked you what areas do you think you could work in, what areas of skills and talents. So we started to shift and understand what that new model would look like under a lockdown situation, and then planned accordingly and put people in the right place. So we built our strengths. Where are our strengths? Where do we need them? So yeah, a lot of it's concerned in terms of community wealth building. You know, North Ayrshire Council, our neighbour, really started this work in 2019. They worked with the Preston, looked what was happening around the world. They really had the vision, and they brought the other two Ayrshire councils on board as a regional approach to wealth building. We now have 9 anchors, NHS, fire, police, the college. Now, if you imagine their collective spending and their collective employment, they'll employ over 40,000 people, and their spending will be into the tens of millions and hundreds of millions. So they're a commission now that are absolutely committed to wealth building, and that buying power and that whole kind of pillared approach is really impacting on our businesses. We've set aside £1 billion for community wealth building as a fund just for businesses to get 5,000 for a wee bit of equipment that will allow them to employ somebody else, and dedicated officers to be there to build wealth in local business. So we've really become very sophisticated. That's been folded into our economic strategy that CLES has developed alongside us. So wealth building is in our first Ayrshire economic strategy, and that ties in with NSET, which is the new national strategy around this. So it's about innovation and inclusive and fair growth. It's about fairness, it's about well-being, and it's not necessarily about profit, but it's about looking to see where are our strengths and how can we build in them. So it's almost built from the bottom up into a much more strategic and committed approach that will give it that longevity and sustainability that it needs.
Fantastic. No, Katie, I can tell that you're bubbling with energy and enthusiasm when you're talking about this stuff. It's really inspiring. Bharati, there's a question that's come in that I'm sure it's something that you've had to address in your kind of public realm planning about how you manage new pedestrian and seating areas with regard to antisocial behaviour.
Yeah, this comes up every time actually, and I think the key thing is when you've taken this community involvement process, you've got people invested in this spaces that are created, and you've got the know-how from the people that use these spaces about what could work and what would not as well. And also, it's not about shifting these people, the antisocial groups, out of the space, because we want to create inclusive spaces, but it's about trying to create areas where there may be a shift in the change in the behavior of such groups. And this can happen only when you have more people coming to these areas, and there is a difference in the vibe in the area, and you have the local. If you're looking at town centers and creating seating areas, it's about where do you locate these, and how the local businesses start to take ownership of these as well, in terms of how they are maintained and how they are, and how the community starts to the footfall, the increase in footfall is so important in addressing these issues really. So you would soon have you may soon have maybe a change in behavior, or maybe people realizing that, oh, this is just not something that's going to be accepted anymore, and that change that's I think it's all connected, and it's all working together with the community and the businesses, and making that change.
No, I think that's a really sensible answer, Bharati. Thank you. We get the same sort of question when You know, it's not just the pedestrianised zones and seating areas, it's things like skate parks and you know, that type of thing. It's the same sort of negative challenge to it. You know, surely this will be a magnet for bad behavior. So no, thank you very much for that. Mark, question for you, two which I'll bring together. One, will there be a levelling up round 3, a levelling up fund round 3? If so, when? And if you know that, then you know more than I do. And secondly, there's a question come in saying about, it's anonymous, but we need to build on community connection and engagement to help our inclusive growth going forward. We're looking to create a levelling up bid. What would be the best way to start to introduce working with the community? And then there's also a reference to probably a need to shift the internal culture within the council to be more interested in doing that. So Mark, I'll go to you first, and then I'll give Katie a chance just to add onto that last bit about how you get the internal culture going.
Thanks, Andrew. So first question, levelling up round 3. My understanding is that there is government is committed to holding a levelling next third round of the fund, but it's at some point this year, I think, is the wording. So if there's a commitment,
which even for government is fairly vague. It's normally the spring or the autumn. Yeah, it's just sometime this year. Yeah,
that's true. I think the last two rounds have involved sort of a summer application window. So if there's a, you know, there might be, who knows? It's deliberately.
To be honest, it feels a little bit tight for that one. I think it might be later in the year, but yeah, there's definitely work that can be done on the stuff that you were talking about, selecting projects and things way ahead of time. Because when the starting gun is fired on the application window, it's not the time to start considering which of your projects you might want to focus on. You need to do that work up front, which is the theory of change stuff that you were talking about.
Exactly that. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. No, the second question, really interesting one around, if I understood correctly, engaging with communities and ensuring that their voice is heard within the sort of process, specifically for a levelling up fund bid. Well, I don't think there's one single sole way of doing it. I think it's very much about building on the infrastructure and the networks that are currently in place and assuming those work, being clear about what questions we're asking communities, and going back to the theory of change side of things, it's about understanding challenges that are being faced, the impact of those challenges, but also what good looks like. It's very much needs to be a positive conversation based on the reality of the situation at the moment. Bids I've worked with, there's a range of ways of sort of engaging with communities, everything from, the council consultations through to engaging with community groups and third sector organisations and involving them in that dialogue and meaningful conversation with communities. But ultimately, each place will be different. The culture side of things, I think, is really interesting and very challenging. Reflecting on what Katie said towards the start, this is a cultural shift about how we look at communities and how we see the role of the council. Isn't the flick of a switch. It's very much a long-term shift here. So yeah, I mean, I'd be really interested in Katie's thoughts on that in terms of.
Well, I want to give Katie the final word here. So just really on that cultural bit in particular would be fantastic, Katie.
Yeah, I mean, there's a brilliant process that I'm aware of that's worked so well for us in terms of generating community power. It takes a bit of time, and that's about communities developing their own action plan. The process is exactly the same every time, but every time a different action plan is produced because the places are different. And that action plan then gives a wider scope for investment. So, the ideal would be to starting with that action planning process with communities now, because when the money becomes available, then actually they're already on board. They've recognised what they love about their community, what they hate about it, what they want to do to change it themselves, and where we can work together with them to do that. And we've done that process over and over again, an enabling role in that. And the communities actually develop it themselves, go door to door and round communities. The council recognises the plan if it has at least 40% sign up from the wider community. And then they hold an event for voting. And based on what people have told them, people can vote. And there's sometimes donkeys there and singing. It's run by the community. The plan's then put in place. It's usually a 5-year plan, and then is launched by the community and the stakeholders, people like me, are in the audience. And that 5-year plan would have things that are important to that community to take forward, and they would take forward it themselves. So the best answer to that question is, if that process is started now, even on a smaller scale, and it then built up with community by community, when the bidding approaches come, you're not going to a consulting role, you're already deeply engaged. You know that X community really needs investment in its public realm, and they've said it in their plan, and that's where you go with that. Another community might not have wanted that, but might want something around heritage, and therefore when that opportunity comes, so the council's investment route and investment routes of others start to be dictated from the bottom up. And I hate even using that phrase, it's a bit Carry On movie, isn't it? But
well, everybody understands. Everybody understands what it means, though, Katie. I think that's fantastic advice, and I think that the moral of the story there is, from either a technical perspective or an engagement perspective, you can't just start doing all this stuff once the bidding window opens. You've got to start laying the foundations now and doing that engagement. So, look, on that note, thank you very much, Katie. Thank you, Bharati. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody who has listened. We've managed to hold on to almost all of our listeners through the whole thing. So we must have been doing okay. But like I said, we'll be sending out the recording of this, and I'll send some links to some useful stuff around business cases and things. But thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.